Welcome to episode 4 of Race to the Bar with me, your host, Daryl LeVar. In this episode, we're going to continue where we left off in episode 3 by looking at Jonas Rappin's Latebound constant generator. And yes, I understand the oxymoronicness of this Latebound generator. Latebound is stuff that you don't necessarily need a generator for, but I understand the purpose. And Jonas was the one that was nice enough at the MVP Summit to give me this Raise the Bar energy bar. I ate the chocolate one. It was delicious. This is the raspberry one. I'm not necessarily a raspberry fan, so that's good, which means I won't be tempted to eat it, and I can continue to use it for props for this episode. So that's good. So anyway, in this episode, we're going to first start off with making sure that our project is up to date. So I've already gone through and created my own fork from Jonas's GitHub repository, and I downloaded the code. I made a pull request and I submitted it to him. He accepted the pull request. Great. The problem is now he merged that pull request into his code, and if I don't get that pull from there, then it's going to include my changes all over again. Right? So this is kind of something you want to do when you're dealing with GitHub, is you want to make sure that you've resynced your local fork to the remote repositories. The easiest way to do this, and the way that I used to do it, was to go through and just delete your fork and resync it, recreate it. That works. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, except that you just delete everything that you have, and it takes a little bit longer and whatever. So not necessarily the best way, although it does work. So what is the correct way of doing this? I never remember, and I always have to look it up. So there is a question out here on Stack Overflow that I've starred called Visual Studio 2015 and GitHub update fork from upstream master, and I'll include that in the show notes here. But in this, it does give a nice step-by-step explanation, and I figured I'd go ahead and give myself a actual video explanation to help others that may have not found that link, and as well as that may be new to GitHub. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you've added that remote repository. So if you go into settings, and under the repository settings, see here you have remotes. We have our original and our upstream. And the upstream is the one that you're going to want to have in order to ensure that you can go ahead and get that version. Now I've added another upstream version here. It's the same exact one. It doesn't really matter here in this case, but make sure that you've actually seen this actually shows Rappin as him being the actual creator of that repository. And here's mine under my name, my GitHub account. So I've added that remote repository there. If it's not there, you have to go in and add it. And in order to add it, you have to go in and call it whatever you want. Just make sure you include upstream in it to make sure you're keeping those things separate from your origin. So upstream. And in here, you're going to want to put in the actual address that you're going to want to pull it from. So in the clone or download, you just want to copy that to clipboard, and you want to paste it in there for the fetch and the push. And say OK, and that'll create your remote repository here, or your remote fork link here. Actually, I don't even know what that is. Is it a remote repository? I don't know. I'm not a GitHub expert. I'm just doing what I see on the internet. So that's there. And once that's there, you can go in and actually sync that other, sync the actual remote repository. So in the branch here, we're going to go to remotes on the upstream. And I'm going to switch over to that one. I'm going to fetch from that one. Okay. So I succeeded in fetching all the commits from there. Now if I go back to a sync, it should be getting to the current branch, and it should be pulling in all the stuff that has been checked in. Okay. So all it's been in, I've synchronized the outgoing commits and everything else. And I should, if everything is working right, I should make sure if I go to my fork of it, see it's showing that it's 2 commits behind, which is not what I want. So I haven't done this quite right. So let's go ahead and take a look, see what I've actually figured out what I haven't done right here. All right, I didn't merge it. So merge from that into that. There we go. Okay, so if I go in that commit, hopefully I'll see some changes. Yes, there's one change in there. Great. So I can go back and actually sync all my changes. Now if I go back and I look at this, now if I refresh it, this branch is even. That's what you want to have before you want to start coding, to make sure that whatever you push doesn't give extra differences in the fork. You want to make sure that it doesn't bring in anything else different. It's synced up, it's 100% the same, everything's there. And also when you've done that, you always want to run any unit test that exists and build, make sure it builds. So that's the first, basically, unit test and compile. Build all started. Ready, succeeded, awesome. Make sure I don't have any errors out here. This was the app insights that Jonas has added to be able to go through and add apps insights for all of his tools in the XRM toolbox. So that's something new he added, which is why I don't remember seeing those before. Now they're there, so whatever that is, warnings, that would annoy my OCD, but it works, which is better than my stuff does. I don't have any of that kind of logging in there. So that builds just fine. We'll run a unit test, make sure everything's still working. We're in good order, and yes, hey, everything's good. All right, so now at this point in time, now we're ready to actually start coding. I've gone ahead and picked up 3 files to take a look at. The first file is the log usage file, and this file is just used to be able to send messages out to App Insights. The first thing to notice about it is it does make use of C# preprocessor directives. That's a little pound sign here, an if. Basically it says if this argument exists, then that's true, else do this other part here. So in this case, if it's going to exist, then run this return statement, else don't. And if you look at the actual build event for this, you see define debug constant is defined there. If I uncheck that, take a look at it, then that return is not executed, and this is executed. Go change that. And if we do the release build, you see that's not selected there as well. But I'm going to switch back to debug. Go back to here again. You can see switch it back and forth. This changes what gets highlighted and what doesn't get highlighted. For this, I'm just going to be a little more verbose that this is going to do one thing in this case and nothing in another case. So in this case, I'm just going to extract this out into a different method. And we can call this thing do log safe. Call that safe just because it's guaranteed not to throw an exception. The other thing I actually may want to change here as well is, no, I'm okay. If I wanted to, I could say, hey, if it's debug, then actually put something out and display it or log it or something. But in this case, we don't want to do that. So generally, it's always a bad idea. It's always a bad idea to put an empty catch. But in this case, we're actually going to be logging something. So that's the one case where I kind of break that rule to say it's okay not to actually do anything in your catch or log out your catch because you're actually doing the logging. So if I'm doing the logging and I fail in the logging, well then I don't really care. And you have to also put this in the TryGetCatch because this is going to be an async task that we're not going to wait for. We're going to let it run. So you're going to want to make sure that catch is there anyway. So theoretically, maybe you might want to have a little config option to spit that out to a flat file just for your own personal usages if you want to. So that might be a suggestion to put in there. So maybe that might go in there. But for now, we're just going to say it's okay just because we're attempting to log something. If we get an error logging something, don't worry about it. So in here, this is giving us a warning because it's not returning itself. It's not awaiting it, basically. So this is an asynchronous call, and it's not awaiting anything which would cause an issue normally. Because normally you always want to be awaiting it to bubble that up so you can handle it however you want to handle it. In this case, if we just want to put another var here, we can do that, and that gets rid of our warning. So like our warning, we got 3. And that's just a simple way to get rid of that warning if in this case we don't actually want to wait. And having that don't wait variable is a good call out to saying, just don't wait, run through this. I don't want to wait for this thing. I don't want to hold up anything else we're working on. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, I don't care. Eat the exception. Yeah. So in this case, I think this is his old one because he's actually going up to the stat counter. But anyway, so that is just a couple things to look at that one. And this is giving us a slight warning because it's in the end if. And if we go to the release, that warning will go away. So that's just fine. One we can safely ignore. All right, that took another error out of it. So let's continue going. We're just going to save that. Another error, another warning. I hate warnings. This is a nice use of an internal method here, just to show a little message box for what's being shown here. So that's good. Close that. Let's go ahead and look at the Metadata Helper. So this class is used to help do queries back and forth between CRM to go get the metadata. The one thing I like to do in these situations, if at all possible, is organize these things by alphabetical, because it's no fun to try to figure out, do I have that in there or not have that in there? If it's alphabetical, you save yourself some pain. So the quickest way that I know to go through and do that is to bring it over to Notepad++, and we can select all of these things and go to Edit, go to our string operation, line operations, and say Sort. Now they're all sorted the way we want it, and then boom. You can see here I also add a comma to the end here, because that one will not be the last one anyway, and then I don't have to worry about what it actually is or isn't. So I'm going to go ahead and resort that again. Line operations. Sort that. Done. Alright, so now everything's in alphabetical order, which is kind of a nice little option here. Except for that, because it's commented out. I'll go back and add that in there. This can be made static. The name of that's kind of unusual, but if that's its name is conventions, I'll leave that be. We have some sequential checks here. This is just that null coalescing option here. It makes things a little bit more readable. Since this is going off the edge here, I am going to put these on separate lines. So if the metadata is not equal to null, metadata count equals 1, and we have the logical name equaling the entity name. That's a whole contains key logic. Great. And now we have a whole bunch of nested stuff. So let's see if we can go ahead and combine those. Well, let's see here. In this case, we can combine these all into a single AND. So I delete at least one level nesting just by doing that. Logical null contains the key, and so he's doing a dictionary check on the contains, and then he's going to actually go and get it. There's nothing really wrong about that, except that it's doing the check twice. Dictionaries have a TryGetValue, and that's a much better option to use. I had a conversation once upon a time, it's on the internet somewhere, between MVP Daniel Kai, and he pointed out that yes, you always want to be in that TryGetValue because you never know what's going to happen if you're doing some multi-threading. So in this case, the key is going to be the entity again, and then the out is going to be the actual, do we actually use the value at all here? This entity is a string, okay. So I'm just going to rename that entity metadata, I guess. Cool. So now rather than having to go look that up multiple times, we actually have a reference to it. Can I change that to var? Yes, I can. Okay, cool. Okay, so here's an option where I like putting this to more of a link expression here if I can. So we looked at this before. It's going through, looping through all of them where the logical name is equal to the attribute. So it's just looking for that logical name in there. And when it finds it, it's going in and returning that metadata attribute. So I'm returning that, and then to make this even easier, why not make this an extension method? Because all we're doing is we have our metadata. What do we have here? We have our dictionary of entity metadatas, and we're using the string name to go and get that actual attribute out, and then we're using the attribute name to get the actual value out of that. And if it doesn't exist, we're just returning null. So there's no reason this can't just be a little extension method, really. So this is called a method. This is get attribute metadata. Let's go ahead and put this over in our entity or extension class. So far everything's going off of strings, I believe. I want to fix this the way that I want to fix this. Well, the name of this method is already getAttribute, so let's just call it getAttribute. Naming things, it's hard. Done, return attribute. Right, that looks a lot easier to copy and paste. And not to fix anything afterwards too. So we have our get attribute here. It is public. And again, I'm making good use of this control minus to go back to where I was. I've got set up to do the control goes to definition to go to find where this thing's actually declared at. And then I found where it was at, control minus to come back. Here I want to go through and actually put our entities in here. Okay. Invert that a little bit here. So if it's null, or if I didn't get a value, or if it's there, return null. And then this one again, it's going through, looping through every single attribute that's in that metadata for that entity, finding the right one and returning it. Be a simple first or default. Give me the first or default where the logical name equals to that name. Single line, a little bit more precise as to what it's actually doing. Rather than having this whole thing going in here, we can call it here. So for the entities, get the attribute, give it the entity and the attribute, and you're done. That's pretty cool, huh? Go get the entity metadata from the server. If it already contains it, we're not going to do anything else. Goes and loads the metadata and goes and adds that. So that's just a little bit easier to see what that function's doing. Go get the metadata from the server. If not, then go ahead. If it's there, then go ahead and get the actual attribute. That's it. Anything else? Could invert that as well if I wanted to. I'll leave it there for now. Condition, an object initializer we can use. Not a whole lot more to add to that. So let's call that one good. And let's go on to the actual meat and potatoes of what this is, the actual Latebound constants generator. So this file, one thing I don't like about this file, just by looking at it, it's almost 1,000 lines long. It's kind of hard sometimes into an issue with these files that are the forms that we're using, just because there's a lot of hooks that have to get added in, and it gets pretty bad. Usually what I can do is extract out a logic class that I try to at least get away from the actual view and have the logic there, and that tends to help a little bit. So there is a lot of grouping here that Jonas has done, grouping all the methods here, and that's nice to an extent. If you have everything closed to begin with and you're knowing what you're looking for, it helps. Sometimes that runs into an issue when you're dealing with, if you make a method private or public that was private, or vice versa, then that changes where it goes in the source code and looks kind of weird. So and that doesn't happen a whole lot, but just maybe a negative that comes with using those regions. So right here we have a little message that's popping up. Possible multiple enumeration of IEnumerable. This is something that really bites you when you're doing something like link to SQL. When we're all in memory here, it isn't quite as big of a deal, but it is something that you can help alleviate, and is a good catch here. So what's going on here is we have this controls collection, and we call cast. Cast returns an IEnumerable, which means that if we call it, it's got to do the work to go return it. And if we call it, it again does the work to go return it. It doesn't remember what it just did. It always is going through and doing the IEnumerable where it's going through and looping through it each time. And that means that if it's potentially doing something expensive or something that could be altering the collection, then you're going to get some side effects. So in this case, we are doing this controls twice here. So I'm just going to go ahead and to array that. And now it's an actual array, it's not going to go through it and have to do that twice here. Generally in the constructor, you want to be careful about throwing any exceptions, because the object isn't completely initialized. Now you throw an exception, it's not initialized, you're in a really weird state. So you may want to throw a try-catch around that, but I'll leave that be for now. Closing plugins. This is the logic that's on the closing of the plugin. It goes in and we'll go through, save the settings, and then actually close the actual plugin. Here we have all of our event handlers. So these are just strictly the actual way you do WinForms development from back in the 90s, I guess. So not a lot has changed here. It does kind of get kind of annoying that it's by default it's going to give you this method name, which isn't the normal method naming standards, but whatever. Here's a new feature that's in C# here where we can use pattern matching. Before we had this as. If we use pattern matching, it uses the is. We don't need to do the as cast. It's doing kind of that for us as well. Say it is, and now whenever we're referring to sender in here, it's going to refer to it as the grid. And that just makes one less thing we have to go through and define, which is rather nice. I can all be simplified down to a single if statement. Column index equals 0, sender is not null. Do I even need that? Sender is not null. Data grid view, because this is check that issue anyway. Make sure it's the actual data for it. Go through and get the entity color, and then go through and do that. So yeah, that's all there is to it. So that makes it a little simpler there. Here we have another case of one of our warnings that we don't want. Actually, I should probably be consistent. What did I call the other one? I called it don't wait. We gotta keep going rather than don't wait. Don't like the negative in there if I don't have to have it in there. Keep going. All right, cool. So that's another warning. Did we get rid of all the warnings in this project? So when we're running this in build mode of debug, this is going to get triggered to true. It's not going to do that. It's not going to actually do that. And it's going to invoke the result handler with an empty string. If we actually do it in release mode, now it's going to go through and send to app insight safe. And it's going to wait for that to be done. It's going to get the results from that, which is going to be this response here, and return that result. So no warnings in our code, which is nice not to worry about. All right. So all the warnings are gone. We can continue going on looking at the actual main code here. Another pattern matching example here. We'll switch that. Here's another statement where usually I like to make this a where statement. All right. So that makes this whole thing a lot quicker here. Where get all the rows were cast where it is a data grid row, select the data bound item or it's of type metadata proxy and set that selected. Here are all the settings we're getting out of the settings. It's funny, I did the same exact thing. So either he basically copied his or I copied his. I don't know which. A pretty long function as is. So this should just be called getFilter. So this is the case if you're ever running into something that you think may be duplicate code. Just a quick check here is to create your little temporary variable here that is what your thing is. So this is the attribute name. Now the rest of this should be exactly the same, except this name is different. And then that is exactly the same. Now, if this was a little more complicated, you could do something like this as well, just to separate that out into a separate function. All right. So we're getting an error because it's the same exact thing, which is what we want to make sure that we're just doing the same exact thing. It's the same parameter getting passed in. Attributes all the same. Filtered attributes. Great. I'll delete one of those. Update that to be just getting passed in. One thing I don't like about it is I happen to put that first. So let's change the signature on that. So these are grouped. Yeah, so we got rid of all the extra there, so just being a single where. This you could separate into a separate method. Get custom filter. Get managed filter. Get search filter. And then if you want to be OCD, I'm going to put those down in the correct order which they are used. That at least makes it a little more sense what we're doing here. First I looked at that, I had no idea what we were doing. But this is just the, hey, go ahead and get the filter for the attributes. We have the custom filter, the managed filter, and the search filter all applied. Cool. And we're going to have something very similar to that for this. There you go, got our filtered entities. A couple where statements. That's rather nasty. What is that doing? Logical name. Selecting the logic name. It's not equal null. The joining on it, else string empty. Jonas, whatever this is doing, go and make a name for it. I think that's getting a list of selected attributes, but I'm going to leave that be for now. Okay, so we have something that's nested 4 levels deep, and that's because we're doing this post workback callback handler kind of logic here. Give it else with no if in the else, so we can get rid of that else and just make it a single one. And for those of you that don't know, this whole work async logic here is how we're handling the async functionality within WinForms, because you have that thread that's on the actual main thread, and that's the part that you don't want to be hosing up and doing other stuff. So we have the message, we have the worker that actually does whatever that work is, and then once the work's done, we get this callback that comes in, and we can process whatever the results are here. And then in here, Jonas is calling it, we can call it update the UI and doing some other logic in there that's outside of the actual callback, basically. So that's a little covariant issue here. If we go back here, this thing says that it's going to an array, but the array actually should be an array of solution proxies, not an array of objects, which is what this is actually expecting. And you run into covariance, contravariance issues here, potentially. So just be on the safe side, we'll cast that to an object and then to array it. Ooh, big old if statement here. I have to scroll to see what that is. Let's invert that. Let's try to make this a little bit less indented. Oh, this is parsing out probably the selected entity strings. And these are probably parsing out the selected attributes for that entity. Set selected attributes. Ooh, why do we have an if there? Oh, because this is going to return and then recall this. That goes through and calls the whole function all over again. I think we want to just call this load attributes over again, but maybe not. That's a question for you, Jonas. Maybe you want to make that a separate method and call that separately. Because that's this whole load attribute stuff. Just go through and loading up all those on-change events. So maybe that needs to get changed. All right. I think we're it. I think that's it. Let's go ahead and take a look to see what all we've updated here. So in the app insights, we went ahead and handled this issue with the warnings that we were getting and separated that out into a separate method, sent to AI safe, just to make that a little more safer. And to be a little less logic that's wrapped up inside these conditional statements, if at all possible. For the extensions, we've gone through and added this get attribute extension, which based on the entities collection, goes through and finds the entities if it exists, goes and get it, and if that exists, finds the attributes. If those exist, if they don't exist, returns null. It also goes out and tries to find the very first attribute that matches the given attribute. I have gone through and added in some stuff for resharper here. I will probably ignore these. Actually, I probably won't check those in. Just because if he doesn't resharper, it doesn't make sense to put that in the project. So I'll stage those. Okay, let's go back to that one at the end. Log usage. We went through and, again, handled that warning issue we were getting. And both those spots. And Metadata Helper. Looks like we did a lot of work, but basically we just went through and reordered these things in an alphabetical order. And made that read-only. Separated this out to some small readable, smaller methods. Kind of big methods to begin with. And some property expressions. That's about it to that one. Here we handled issues where it was potentially going through and enumerating over that multiple times, which should make it marginally faster. And here we had all these wheres. We just made it a single check and then made it much more readable to see what is actually doing, if that makes sense. simplified this add to filtered attributes, so it's the same method in both. So we removed some code there. So there wasn't a whole lot to do with this one, this project. And again, the main issues was probably just those filters were kind of ugly to kind of look at and see what all was going on, and to realize that you're doing a where with another where with another where, which is just one big where with some and statements in there. So going through and combining those into separate methods here, where it just is going through and doing that logic there, it makes it a little more readable, I think. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you like what you see, you want to see more, please send me your code. Currently, I've got nothing on my, no one send me anything to look at. So I will go and find something, unless someone else sends me something before I do episode 5. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm on DDLabar. And if you are on LinkedIn, you can feel free to try to reach out to me in there. I generally do not accept LinkedIn messages unless you have some message about how you know me. Hey, I saw you on the Raise Labar, and I wanted to submit some code. If you send that to me, sure, I'll accept your request, and we'll see, and just make sure you send me some code to go take a look at. So besides that, hopefully you found this enjoyable, and I hope that you were able to help raise your bar through watching this as well. So thank you very much, and have a good day.